My name is Paul Manley. I'm with the Mid-Island chapter of the Council of Canadians, recently on their national board for the BC Yukon region. Tonight we have two special guests to talk about LNG, the LNG industry, and fracking in British Columbia. Tonight we have with us Dr. Owen Finn. He's a retired KPMG partner with a PhD in physical chemistry, MBA in international business. He's a 30-year part-time resident of Boyer Island in Howe Sound and is actively, excuse me, just getting over a cold, actively involved with the Future of Howe Sound Society and My Sea to Sky, two community groups who have been active in raising concern and opposition to the wood fiber LNG project currently proposed for Howe Sound. His talk will focus on the economics of exporting LNG from BC and the public safety and pollution concerns about LNG plants and tankers. And first we're going to have Damien Gillis. We're going to have both of these gentlemen get up and speak, and then we're going to do a Q&A afterwards. Damien Gillis is a Vancouver-based documentary filmmaker and investigative journalist with a focus on environmental and social justice issues, especially related to water, energy, and saving Canada's wild salmon. He is the co-director of the soon-to-be-released film Fractured Land, the story of Caleb Behn, an inspiring young First Nations law student from northeast BC, working to defend his people's land from some of the most intense industrial activity in the world. Damien is also the co-founder of the online publication The Common Sense Canadian. So we're going to start off with Damien's trailer for his film, but please welcome Damien and Owen.
My daughter and her husband brought him home. And then Grandpa was holding him and he said, "You're gonna be a great hunter, boy."
First they came for the trees, they came for the gold, they came for the fur, they came for the children, they came for the oil, they came for the gas. And they're using the water to fracture the bones of Mother Earth.
There are fires I pass on the Alaska Highway that have burned every single day of my life. If you're gonna fight with tools, get the best tools you can.
Anybody who can throw a hatchet and sue you is a force to be reckoned with.
Reconciliation now is much bigger than just our two societies. It's about water and the ability we have as cultures and societies to mitigate our destructive behavior in the face of unknowns.
We have much more abundant resources of gas than we had ever fathomed.
Fracking is safely regulated in British Columbia, and we continue to implement leading sustainable practices.
I hate the idea that my people in my territory have to be thrown under the goddamn bus every time.
We've gotten to the point where, in our desperate need for hydrocarbons, we actually, by definition, inject poisons into the earth.
At least every other house has probably had someone with cancer.
Kids, when they get exposed to chemicals, I have a birth defect, 18 surgeries, 7 plates, 20 screws in my face.
I think to some degree we are all fractured within ourselves.
We have this perceived enemy outside, but our fight is not with that enemy. Our fight is a psychological fight.
Half of my family supports the industry and half works very actively against it.
You're trapped in between worlds and between your people and between issues. In the middle, and it's so tempting to walk away and just say, to hell with it.
You have to get back to those places where the wisdom was embedded and learned in the first place.
We look up to him now.
What Grandpa said was, "You make me feel free to take the journey to the next world, knowing that his legacy and our people are in good hands."
How do you defend your home when something much bigger and more powerful wants to take it and destroy it?
Born Indigenous in this country is a political act, a defiant political act. I want to be the tip of the spear, at least a part of it.
Thank you very much. This film that you just saw a little snippet of, I've been working on that for quite a few years now in association with documentary channel, CBC's documentary channel and Knowledge Network here in BC and a few other broadcasters around the world. And we're very close to completion now, probably about 2 months away. We've been in the editing suite for the last 6 months and very looking forward to finishing that, getting into film festivals and coming back and sharing with communities like yours when it's completed. And it's been an interesting journey, and there's a lot of changes within this narrative and the whole industry that we talk about, the business of fracking and LNG. And this is something that I came to be interested in this subject based on my own family history. My family settled in the Peace River Valley, which is where most of that imagery that you saw there is from, over 100 years ago. We were one of the early settler families. We lost our ranch, Gold Bar Ranch at 20 Mile in 1968. It sits today under the Williston Reservoir. And today, some of those other pioneer families that my family's known going back 100 years, they face the potential loss of their homesteads and some of the best farmland in Canada for yet another dam called Site C. That has at times been tied to the LNG industry in terms of providing some of the enormous energy requirements that it has and various other reasons. But that sort of sense of the clash of both this beautiful landscape and some of the more traditional values and things like farming and the lifestyle that First Nations had there for 10,000 years before my family showed up, clashing with some of the biggest industrial development on the planet. Is really baked into my blood and my history. And so it's something that I've always been interested in. As a result of those changes in the valley 50 years ago, my uncles today all work in the oil and gas industry there. But it's been something that has changed a lot in their lifetimes. And they're all getting fairly close to retirement. I now have young cousins who are just getting into the game and making big bucks now, but also starting to wonder, like, how long is that job going to be there with some of the big changes we've had economically in terms of oil and gas prices. All this is kind of up in the air. And this industry today that they're working is something they don't recognize from what they've been used to, the quote unquote conventional industry. And that's something I really want to talk about here today, which is what a different animal so-called fracking or shale gas is compared to the way that we've always had this industry since the 1950s and 60s in this province. And this is all really brought into sharp relief with our government's LNG policy. And the reason for this policy essentially is that with all this new fracking that's come about, I'm going to explain that process a little bit and show you some images from drawing on my film and other resources. There was a glut of gas that flooded into the North American market over the last 5-10 years, and that drove the price down. So essentially, they kind of shot themselves in the foot with all this overproduction. And meanwhile, there are other markets like Japan and China and Malaysia that have been paying, for a temporary period of time, we're paying a lot more, up to 4 or 5 times as much for that resource as we were here. So the big bright idea has been, let's access these new markets. In order to do that, you have to turn it into a liquid so you can put it on a ship and take it halfway around the world. And so that's where we're at right now, is in order to save the gas industry in BC, just like we hear with the oil sands, in order to save the Canadian oil industry, we have to build these pipelines and new terminals on the coast and start to get the resource to other countries in Asia and around the world. And that's really the big, overarching narrative that we're talking about here. So, and I'm keenly interested in the economics here. I founded the Common Sense Canadian, a journal. You'll see some images of some of the stories that we run on this with Rafe Mayer about 4 or 5 years ago. He's a former SOCRED cabinet minister, and I think we share a common sort of set of values in as much as we both love British Columbia. We're avid fishermen. We love this supernatural BC that really characterizes us as a province, but we're both conservative in terms of fiscal values and economically. I'm a business person. My whole family has worked in resource sectors in BC for the last century. So I didn't approach this industry or any industry that we're talking about here with a closed mind or from a particularly socialist or tree-hugging perspective. And that's why we call it the common sense Canadian, because we feel that there is a sweet spot somewhere there where we can create sustainable and healthy economic opportunities and at the same time take care of our environment and take care of our citizens and our needs of taxpayers, et cetera. And that's the kind of dialogue that we're aiming for. So that's the lens through which I've approached all this stuff. How many of you remember the big promise of $100 billion back in the last election? Just won the election for the Liberal government, in my humble opinion. Another big claim that we've heard, and so we have an incredible resource here tonight, a man with great economic wisdom. So he's going to cover that portion. I'm really looking forward to his talk on that. Owen, I'm going to stick to I'm going to address some of the big myths in terms of the environmental issues surrounding shale gas and LNG. And this is probably the big one, clean LNG. That's the slogan of this government with this resource. That's how it's being branded. Literally, this is a quote, they say this all the time, is the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet. So I'm gonna lay out, drawing on the best experts that I know. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an economist, I'm a common sense Canadian. Hope like a lot of you. And so all I've done is just research nonstop over the last 4 years and to keep my ears and eyes open and draw on the best information that I can find that's available to the public to answer these questions. This is something I really want to hammer home here. LNG is not natural gas. It's a beautiful euphemism that's been used for a long time very effectively by the industry. LNG equals fracking. We might as well call it LFG, liquefied fracked gas. Why do I say this? Well, first of all, what is fracking? I'm just going to give really quickly, for those who aren't, the Coles notes on this. Basically, the idea is we're now accessing gas that's trapped several kilometers underground in shale formations that we couldn't get at before. So it's been described as a miraculous new technology. What it's using is a combination of technology. Some people say fracking's been around for a long time. That's true. They used to use Gatling guns to try to blow up shale back in the 40s and 50s. There's been the idea of exploding formations that have oil and gas in them. They've tried that before. What we're talking about here really is the combination of what's called directional drilling. And we're talking deep, sometimes several kilometers down, and then through one vertical borehole, you can then make multiple horizontal 2 to 3 kilometer long holes in through these shale beds once you reach that level. And then using a combination of enormous volumes of water combined with a very fine sand and a chemical cocktail that varies from play to play and region to region in order to crack open, like taking a giant fire hose or a pressure washer and shooting that underground to crack open that brittle shale and release that gas. And we speak of it almost like we're liberating this poorer gas that's been trapped in the shale for so many years. But and the idea is that because the groundwater is up here and this is way down here, that never the twain shall meet and everything's fine. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. So why do I say that LNG is fracking? Well, this is where we're at in BC today. And this is changing because of the economics here. The industry is under a lot of pressure right now, but roughly over the last several years, we've been producing traditionally 4 billion cubic feet a day of gas out of northeast BC predominantly. And this is where we need to get, based on the licenses that have been approved, the pipelines that are on the table, this is it just would double the entire gas output of Canada, all on the shoulders of British Columbia. Almost all of the new gas coming online today is from fracking. So we're about 50-50, and again, it really depends on the month and the time of year, but we're about 50-50 conventional, old school natural gas and fracking, shale gas today. But most of the new supply that's being discovered and brought online is coming from shale gas now. So if we have to triple or quadruple our output of gas to supply this LNG vision, then almost all of that new supply will have to come from fracking. And that means that we're going to see something on the order of anywhere between 30 and 50,000 new fracked wells. So something like at least as many as we have already, or even close to double the total amount of gas wells that we have had conventionally and unconventionally in the 50, 60-year history of the natural gas industry BC over the next 20 years just to power this LNG industry. So it's a huge ramping up of fracking. So everything we talk about here tonight, just keep that in mind. It's a big multiplier of that. Another really important thing, and this data comes from a fellow named David Hughes. He is quite simply the top independent shale gas expert in Canada. And don't take my word for it. Take the federal government's word for it. He was the senior geologist at the Geological Survey of Canada in charge of the National Shale Gas Potential Review for the federal government. He is since retired and consults privately and speaks all around the world to the EU, to major global banks who are considering investing in this. And this data comes from all the available actual wellhead production data. He's done it in the United States, or the top 5 plays in the States, and he did it recently in BC. This is not guesswork. These are facts. They're absolutely as pinpoint accurate as you can get. And what this looks at is the decline rate of these wells. And go back to how different fracking is from conventional. These wells come on heavy and hard, and they produce a lot of gas, and it got everybody really excited, and they started going to big investment banks and borrowing billions of dollars to invest in capital and ramp up and scale up these operations. But we very quickly started to realize that they also die off very quickly. And that's defined, it's called a decline curve. What that means is that, this is looking at 3-year decline rates. So after 3 years, how much will that production from a given well have fallen off from where it was at the start? And what we found in BC, based on all the available data, is the average is 69%. So in 3 years, almost more than 2/3 of that production is gone. And at that point, you're getting to very marginal returns. And so you've got to keep drilling. You've got to keep moving, as Thomas Homer Dixon calls it, fracking to stand still. You have to keep drilling another hole and another hole to pay the bank, to pay the loans that you borrowed to build the first one, because the floor is constantly falling out from underneath your feet. Now that has huge geological and economic ramifications for the industry, and should be warning flags that Owen will touch on. But it also means you're going to keep multiplying the environmental impacts, all the water and all the other issues, because you've got to keep drilling so many more holes with this new technology. So this is just to illustrate, that's a fracking play in Northeast BC, all the roads and seismic lines and well pads and everything involved. And according to Mr. Hughes, if we were to really take this government's vision seriously, the amount of LNG plants we're talking about, even if you took 3 or 4, I think this is based on 50,000 new holes in BC. So what's at stake here? What are the real issues? And why am I going to say that this is not the cleanest fossil fuel in the world? Well, it's really, I guess, you have the 2 categories mainly. You have the local, on the ground and in the water impacts, and then you have the global big picture climate impacts. And I want to talk about both of them. So we use a tremendous amount of water for this. And our place, particularly the Horn River Basin in Northeast BC, the northeast BC, is the most water intensive play in the world. It has broken all the records for the most water per frac and well. This is based on the admitted, publicly known water use in a year, and this is 2012. So we're talking almost 11 billion liters of fresh water, 10.8 million cubic meters. That's 4,327 Olympic swimming pools of water taken out of the northern lakes, rivers, streams, boreal muskeg, injected with this chemical cocktail, and blasted underground. Some of it is brought up and reused again. Some of it is sequestered underground in deep oil field injection, as they call it, but none of it is going back unperturbed into the ecological or hydrological cycle. And this region has been subject to drought conditions a lot in recent years. And these are some of the problems that can happen with that deep, you think it's all this activity is happening down there, but what you're doing here is cracking open the ground. So it stands to reason that some cracks and fissures are going to form where water can migrate upward into the groundwater. We've seen this happen in places. We've seen earthquakes, seismic activity associated with this industry. pressure differentials and other reasons why it's not so, out of sight, out of mind. This is a little clip. I just want to show you some of the beautiful, pure, clean, pristine water of this is the Liard River Basin. So if LNG goes, this place gets cracked wide open. And it is some of the most pristine, beautiful. You got a place up there called the Liard River Hot Springs. I mean, if you guys take the Alaska Highway, you have to stop there because it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And this will end up looking like the Horn River Basin if the LNG program goes ahead, which you're going to see now. Just a few. This is a little time lapse here of the Horn River of water use. These are Section 8 water withdrawal permits. This is time lapse here. 2010, we're moving forward to 11. Into 12, and let's look at the explosion of the amount of water permits there in recent years. This is produced water, this water that's being used in fracking. It contains these chemicals. They put it into these big pits in an attempt, in fairness to the industry, to try to cut down on freshwater use by reusing some of this water. But there are limits to that. There are 3 ways you can contaminate water from fracking. One is from the drilling fluids that used to lubricate the drill. That can be pretty bad for water. The other thing is from the chemicals we talked about, you put in this cocktail for the fracking. And the third way is called flowback. There's some pretty nasty stuff buried deep down there in Pandora's box underground, including radioactivity. Just today in the Bakken Shale, this pond here had to be scooped out. 4,000 tons of earth had to be remediated because it leaked into the groundwater. When a piece of shale ironically punctured the liner. A couple of companies were caught illegally dumping fracking wastewater into the Dawson Creek municipal water supply last year. Just the other day in shale oil operations in the Bakken in North Dakota, companies now, the oil price is so low, they're looking to cut costs wherever they can. So they're asking the government to relax the restrictions on dumping radioactive waste coming out of these shale oil operations in their local municipal waste facilities. So there's some pretty nasty stuff going on here. Now, this is the land issue. So I talked about the water. This is the Limestone, Texas. This is a mature fracking play down there. So you get a little bit of a look at what the land disturbance looks like. Just a little clip of Caleb's grandfather here, just talking about what it's done to their territory.
Well, the way where they're trapped, made a good living. They've got all kinds of wild meat there, whatever, caribou, moose, beaver, rabbit, chicken. But today, there's none. The person who got the right to the land, he's sitting at home not earning nothing. Mm-hmm. I mean, my point of view and his point of view is the same thing because we're affected. Same way.
So my last question is, what's the right thing to do?
Well, it's kind of late now to say, well, that's wrong. Well, it is wrong from the beginning. They left the elders out. Mm-hmm. And the people of the land have been left out, and we've got a bunch of idiots running around, paper in their hand. And they should, like I said before, should have started the right way, we wouldn't have this problem.
So this had a pretty profound impact. A lot of that activity you saw is within miles of George's trapline that he's had for about 80 years, since he was 8 years old. And he's got a toxic waste disposal site a few kilometers away from his trapline. He's got an old fracking site right at the entrance to it. Interesting little story. My grandfather was a trapper and trader before he married my grandmother in the Peace Valley. And he lived in the Arctic for 20 years. And I had a suspicion that he might have known old George here, and my grandfather passed on years ago, but when I introduced myself to him the first time, I said, I think you might have known my grandfather, Jack Baker. And he almost fell out of his chair. He said, Jack Baker, that was my best friend. We used to trap and trade together like 70 years ago. So it's a small world. Other forms of land disturbance, these are all the different pipelines. That's the black one is the Enbridge pipeline, but look at all these other pipelines proposed to go through the northern wilds of British Columbia to access these new ports in places like Prince Rupert and Kitimat. And that's stirring up a lot of concern and controversy in those local communities along the pipeline right now. We've changed our laws. I mean, this is just one small example, but around putting pipelines through provincial parks. This is both, you could say, interpret that as helping out Kinder Morgan, but also these gas pipelines. Petronas' contractors ran into issues in Grizzly Bear Sanctuary, the Kutsumateen, illegally doing helicopter work and survey work in there, and that caused a big kerfuffle, and they got in a lot of trouble, and bear biologists called them on it, and they got hit the papers. But no worry, boys, we'll just change the laws for you, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Lastly, and Owen's going to talk a lot more about the estuary and the tanker issues and stuff, but I just wanted to show you the Skeena estuary here. This is the second most important salmon river in Canada, and very depleted stocks in recent years. And these plants are massive. They want to put this, Petronas wants to put a plant, it's a Malaysian government company. They want to put a plant right on top of Lilu Island in the midst of some very critical out-migrating salmon habitat, eelgrass, which coal plants over the years, even 30 years ago, a coal plant was rejected for that reason, that it was too devastating. And at that time, the Skeena was in much better shape than the salmon are today. So these are the kinds of things, when they put their application in to the Environmental Assessment Office, they solved that problem by deleting the entire Skeena River and estuary from their project maps. And that's one way of dealing with salmon issues. Until they were called on it by West Coast Environmental Law, so thankfully the public got a little more time to comment on it, but yeah, they got their permits now. So finally, I want to talk about the air, the climate issues here. So even the own government staff have warned this government that, first of all your climate action plans, everything out the window with this baby. Like, we've changed our Clean Energy Act laws. It was like no more gas electric plants in BC, except if you're in Kitimat or Prince Rupert and you want to build an LNG plant, in which case fill your boots. I just got a little clip here.
LNG is one of the fastest growing sources of energy in the world. It's also a chance for us to help the world transition to the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet.
Please join us in welcoming to the stage Premier of British Columbia, the Honourable Christy Clark.
We have so much work to do together, so much ahead of us, with a generational opportunity to build an LNG industry for not just our province, but for our country. And this really is, for us, all about building a nation, creating jobs, rolling up our sleeves to take advantage of this generational opportunity to build a prosperous future for every Canadian. But it is more than just about Canada. This is about our opportunity to make the biggest change and the biggest contribution we ever have as a province to reducing greenhouse gas emissions around the globe. By powering up the economies of Asia and helping them move to the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet, move away from dirtier fuels, cleaning up the air there and cleaning up the air here as well.
The natural gas industry and many politicians like to promote shale gas and natural gas generally as a bridge fuel that allows society to continue to use fossil fuels and yet puts out less carbon dioxide than, say, coal or oil. It's true that less carbon dioxide is emitted, but shale gas in particular, natural gas in general, emit huge quantities of methane. And methane is such a powerful greenhouse gas that when you look at the cumulative impact of these greenhouse gas emissions, natural gas, and particularly shale gas, is the worst of the fossil fuels. Your Premier has their facts wrong. Our research suggests that at least 3.5% of the gas that's developed from the shale gas formations emitted to the atmosphere is methane, possibly up to 8% or more. There's increasing science saying that at least 5-6% of shale gas is going off. When you look at it, say it's 86 times worse than carbon dioxide in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. it's disastrous to use this as a fuel. And using an LNG is probably the worst way to use it as well, because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to liquefy the gas to LNG. It's a lot further methane emissions associated with transporting and storing the fuel.
So I hope you caught that, because that's the world's top climate expert, or expert on the climate implications of shale gas at Cornell University, Dr. Robert Howarth. And he's done the leading edge research on this. And the translation is, not only is natural gas not cleaner than coal, it is absolutely, and especially when you turn into LNG, that adds a whole bunch of extra impacts, from burning gas to create the electricity to cool it, and then bleeding or burning off more gas to power the tanker to get it to China. It is probably fair to say that it's the dirtiest commercially available fossil fuel ever invented. And so this whole idea of the bridge fuel or natural gas being better than coal is just like 15, 20 years ago's theory. And it's not taking account this latest science, which says quite simply, natural gas is methane mostly, and methane is, on a 20-year time scale, is 86 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. So it's fair to say that natural gas burns cleaner than coal. And that's what if you pay attention to the language, that's the way they'll frame it. But we don't care about just the last part of the process. We care about the entire life cycle of this resource. And if you take a step back and look from cradle to grave, from the time you dig it out of the ground to the time you burn it to heat your home or power a factory, this shale gas is far worse than coal. That's the evidence. And we're not even talking about all the ecological stuff here that I just went through, about the land disturbance and the water issues. That's just in terms of climate. So this is really, we're living in Orwellian times here, when our premier can stand up in front of a global audience of energy industry people and the media and the public and say that this is the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet. As I mentioned before, and this is a study by the Pembina Institute, with just a few of these LNG plants, we start to rival the oil sands in terms of our carbon footprint in BC. We go from supernatural BC to superfractural BC, and we're talking about 3 to 4 times the entire carbon footprint of our province today as a result of this industry. So you can change all the light bulbs you want, and switch to a Prius and do whatever you will. It will just be a drop in the bucket in terms of the way that we are abdicating our responsibility as a global citizen with our energy and economic policy. I'm going to hand this over to my colleague here in a moment. I just want to very quickly, give you a sense of some of the great stuff that's been changing in this dialogue. Owen, he may not toot his own horn enough, has been instrumental in getting 5 councils in the Sunshine Coast and the Howe Sound region to vote unequivocally against this the local project, wood fiber LNG in the Howe Sound area. These are places like West Vancouver and Lions Bay that are much conservative bastions, business-minded people. Okay, Squamish just rejected the pipeline drilling permit, test drilling permit in a protected area from Fortis BC last week, thanks to the information that they've received from people and groups like Owens. We're seeing First Nations. We've heard this myth that in the eyes of First Nations, Enbridge bad, LNG good, everybody's on board with it. Not so. There are a few councils that have signed agreements, but we're seeing a huge grassroots upwelling. This is Nisga'a territory, this is Gitxsan territory, this is Wet'suwet'en territory, this is citizens, landowners in the Hazelton region, in the Kispiox Valley. They're getting really fed up about this. They're seeing all these pipelines looming. They're taking to the land, and both First Nations and Non are working together, and they're really creating a huge grassroots opposition to this. We see that this is having an effect, because this is a story I published not long ago from a Freedom of Information source that showed the government is really freaking out about all the citizen activism. They've lost control of the messaging on social media. They can't just buy newspaper ads anymore and dominate the media. They now cannot control the message, and they're very worried that they're losing the quote-unquote social license for fracking and LNG, that the whole policy is falling apart here in the eyes of the public. So there's real progress being made. What you're doing here tonight and the information you're going to share And the movement that you're a part of is important, and it's working, and it matters. So I hope you go home with that and don't just look at all the bad stuff that we have to say here tonight. And finally, on that note, there are so many other things we could be doing economically. I'm not just about saying no to everything. We have new studies from the Canadian Geothermal Association using data, geological data from the oil and gas industry, no less, saying we have enough geothermal potential here in BC to power the entire province. But we're not investing in those kinds of economic and energy opportunities. While countries like Germany and China and Denmark and the US and Brazil are putting huge taxpayer investment and reaping huge benefits in terms of job creation and economic activity from renewable energy to clean tech sectors, we in Canada are sitting here wondering what just happened when oil dropped below $50, and we don't have a plan B. This needs to be on the agenda for this federal election. What is a plan B for Canada? What's a healthy, sustainable alternative that's going to create jobs and take care of citizens' needs without destroying our water and land and air? And that's where I think we need to be going with this conversation. Thank you.
We have a plan to grow our economy here in British Columbia, and much of that plan is around creating a brand new industry in liquefied natural gas. That is what's going to allow us to secure tomorrow for the people of the province. And LNG, as I often say, is a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity. The ability to create 100,000 new jobs, the ability to get paying down and eventually paying off our provincial debt altogether. And we will only bring this industry home to our province if we are all determinedly, purposefully working together. And so we have brought together a group representing organized labor, First Nations, industry, and government to sit down and think about exactly what we need to do together to make sure that the workforce is there to supply the jobs, because you cannot build an economy without people. And we want to make sure, all of us, that British Columbians are first in line for all of those jobs.
Being a curious guy, I thought I'd look into the economics of this industry. It was particularly accelerated because I have a summer place in Howe Sound. And I thought, oh, if an LNG tanker floats by, what's in it? And is it going to do me any harm? So I started looking into this promise, the 75,000 long-term jobs. I thought, maybe. BCers would be first in line for those jobs, but I saw Minister Coleman sign an agreement with China to include temporary foreign workers, because building an industry from scratch means that you have to have people who know what it is. You can't just train people to operate an LNG plant from scratch. So then a debt-free BC, the debt's pretty big. It's $69 billion. It's been increasing very rapidly over the last few years. And then again, this cleanest fossil fuel on the planet, particularly the thought that cleaner air in China would eventually drift over this direction. It's true, some of it does, but I think the Premier forgot that next door to us in Alberta and Saskatchewan, there are 11 coal-burning power plants, and that maybe cleaning up the air there would be a little closer to home. There are about 18, I got 15 of them here, proposed LNG plants in BC. And probably I've just circled the ones of most interest to you. There's the Discovery LNG plant, which is up in Elf Falls, the old pulp mill in Campbell River. It's proposed. It's a big one. It's about 23 million tons a year. That's a biggie by world standards, right up there. That one. The next one is the Steelhead LNG, which is proposed to be out in Sarita Bay at the end of the Alberni Inlet, Barclay Sound. And it's a huge one. It's proposed by a bunch called Kern Partners out of Calgary. It's a Calgary-based energy investment firm. And then the nation out there, the First Nations band, did an agreement with this Steelhead LNG principals to at least explore the idea, and that happened just before Christmas. It doesn't yet have a license from NEB, but NEB sort of hands those out like cotton candy, so it shouldn't be that hard. Then you have this proposal by a company called Westpac Midstream, which has a long history here. I'll tell you about that in a minute. To put one at Tilbury Island at the mouth of the Fraser, pretty close to, if you pass through under the tunnel, it's just to a little to the left of the tunnel on an island called Tilbury Island. Small scale plant. Relatively, it's 3.4 million tons per annum. And to get LNG tankers up and down Fraser River to get there might mean you had to collapse the tunnel and put a bridge there, which is being proposed. And last but not least, the one that got my attention, the wood fiber LNG project in the old wood fiber plant in close to just south of Squamish in Howe Sound. If you look at this figure here, is the total applied for LNG tonnage per annum, 237. That's about the entire world's current consumption of LNG. So NEB thinks that we have a lot of gas to sell and that maybe we could sell it. The approved projects, the yellow here, and all of those projects in yellow have got an approval from NEB to ship this gas to Asia, presumably. And that's about half of that, so it would be 50% of the world's supply. That's a pretty scary thought. For those of you who don't know, the pipeline from Fortis goes from down here in Coquitlam, where it joins up with the mainstream Spectra Energy pipeline from northeast BC and those fracking lands, goes up. It goes up Howe Sound, the back of the lines, to Squamish, doubles around here, goes up the entire length of Texada Island, is a double pipe over to Powell River to the pulp mill there, and there's another double one that comes in just at the south end of the ferry terminal at Comox, and then where it splits and goes north to Campbell River, to Elk Falls, and goes south all the way to Victoria. It's 10-inch pipe. The proposal that I got worried about has a 24-inch pipe going around through to Squamish to feed the appetite 5 or 6 million tons of it a day for the Squamish wood fiber plant. Quick note about Quicksilver. The hurdle to the project is the size of the existing gas pipeline that supplied the former pulp mill, and that 10-inch line is not big enough. It was put in 1989. The 36-inch line will be needed, and therefore a 36 pipeline all the way across the Strait of Georgia, maybe following that existing route I just talked about. And it says that we're identifying and negotiating. So if there's going to be a pipeline, it's going to have to come pretty close to here. It will come north, probably follow the existing one and twin the 10-inch one. Nice news, briefly. On January 9th, 2015, the Quicksilver shares were delisted from the New York Stock Exchange because they'd been under $1 for the last 30 days. Quicksilver is essentially broke. I don't often go to these environmental talks and leave people with a very happy news, so there's a tidbit for you. Steelhead, different matter, 30 megatons, and they've got this agreement going with the First Nations out at Sarita Bay. It's a Faustian bargain at best, and I'll show you why. Way back, 2008, there was a proposal to put an LNG import facility, we were importing it in those days, in Texada Island. The Westpac LNG, same dudes that want to put a plant at Tilbury. And the people of Texada realized what was happening and that it was proposed to bring in LNG, use it to power a generator and supply electricity in competition with BC Hydro. It never happened, but in the course of it all, the good residents of Powell River and Texada Island got a UBCM, Union of BC Municipalities resolution passed that basically banned tankers from Harrow Strait, Georgia Strait, a whole pile of other places, all the way out to Boundary Pass. The government took heed of it at the time. The company went away, the whole idea flaked out, and it never happened. But at the same time, down in Maine, on the other side of Canada, near a place called Passamaquoddy Bay, there was a proposal for an import facility there to feed North New England, New York. But in order to get into the proposed plants, they had to pass through Canadian waters in Passamaquoddy Bay and Head Harbour. And the Canadian government took a pretty dim view of that and decided that the Canadian government views LNG as dangerous cargo that can be banned from transport in Canadian waters. And who stood up to defend that attitude, and they sent a letter to the US ambassador to that effect, was none other than Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who said, we oppose the passage of LNG tanker traffic through Passamaquoddy Bay and will continue to do so, and they have. And then letters got exchanged with ambassadors, etc. Michael Wilson, you may remember. So why is it different on the West Coast, you may ask? Fossil fuel traffic in the Straits is set to increase very dramatically. You'll know that the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan is proposing to go from 60 tankers a year. That's the one-way traffic. We're not counting the ins, we're just counting the outs. To 400. LNG tankers, if all of Woodfibre, Discovery, Quicksilver, and Tilbury came to pass, would be about 500 of them. I'll show you what they look like in a minute. They're big. Coal carriers from the Delta Port expansion at Texel Island, pretty significant because, you know, the plan is to barge it up to Texada, the coal, and get a big stockpile there, and then have the big coal carriers come in opposite you here and take it away. And last but not least, the Gateway Pacific, Cherry Point, Washington, that's about 500 coal carriers a year. We passed it on our way here tonight. It's lined up to the brim with coal, and all that coal is coming from the US. It doesn't much come from northeast BC because the US doesn't currently allow coal exports, but they get around it by shipping it through our port. That's about a 500% increase, and it's going to greatly increase the risk of something wanging into something else. Notably in 3 spots, in the Howe Sound here, in the mouth of the Fraser River, and more particularly down at the south end of Saturna, where in Harrow Strait ships have to make a rapid right turn and then another left turn, and it's a pretty narrow channel. The highest possibility of an accident happening, and God forbid it be a ferry and a LNG carrier, or a ferry and an oil carrier, or an oil carrier, if you want a really big boom, an oil carrier and an LNG tanker. It's a pretty busy waterway. This is a picture, you can look it up anytime you want. Since I kayak a lot, I use it to know when a BC ferry is coming around the corner in Horseshoe Bay. So, but it's up to the minute. All the red ones are tankers. Right? The green ones are freighters. The blue ones are ferries. You can get this. Typical tanker, pretty big. There's a comparison with a BC ferry. Twice as long, twice as high, twice as broad. 3 football fields. This is one I took from my cabin, marked it up with Queen of Surrey, and this is an LNG tanker called the I-Bomb. I didn't pick that name, they did. And this is how big it would be. They have a high windage. In other words, the wind blows them around a bit, and if you've been in Howe Sound in the wintertime, you know that it blows there occasionally. So they get blown around a bit, which means they have to travel at reasonably high speed in order to preserve steerage. How big? Inside an LNG container, that's one guy, and that's one of the tanks of about 4 or 5 in a typical tanker. They're big. When this one's going through Boston Harbor, in order to get in there, it has to pass by a fairly narrow opening in Boston Harbor, and that's a 4-story apartment building to its left. Because Boston, this was rated as a much higher potential target for terrorists, particularly after the 9/11 disaster. Every LNG carrier that comes into Boston Harbor is accompanied by one of these, with a pleasant fellow up here who is to keep people away from it. The mayor of Boston banned them for 2 years after 9/11, and only under special rules were they allowed back in, with the Coast Guard by Homeland Security. The proposal in Howe Sound and elsewhere is there will be none. We have no Coast Guard to speak of on the coast who would do this. As far as LNG, the government advertising would have you believe that, oh, it's harmless, it doesn't burn, it doesn't light, it doesn't do anything. It just vaporizes, goes off into space. It's the second most dangerous thing you can put on the water, and all ships are supposed to keep a certain distance away from it under international maritime law. They're just below explosive ships. And we have a sad history of that one in Canada, if anybody remembers the Halifax one. After 9/11, the US government commissioned a study by a bunch called Sandia National Laboratories to say what would happen if either a terrorist or put a hole in the side of an LNG tanker, or the tanker crashed into something else or something into it. And they said, well, it wouldn't quite vaporize. Methane, of which LNG is just the liquefied form, methane is lighter than air. Unfortunately, liquefied natural gas is at minus 162 degrees Celsius. It's twice as cold as anywhere on Earth has ever been. And what it does when it leaks out is it forms a low fog, because it picks up water vapor, especially if it's on an ocean. And it forms a low fog and drifts wherever the wind blows it. The first ignition point it hits, where its mixture with air is the right conditions, and that's a pretty broad condition, it will explode in a fireball. And there are some various models of how far and how long that dispersion might occur, but the one I trust the most is about, for 42 minutes, this thing is lethal. After it's spilled, it will freeze the surface of an ocean solid and skate over it like a skater to the farthest point it can get, vaporize and form this low cloud, and then it will be flammable. But the worst case is you get 50% fatalities out to 3.7 kilometers. So if that plant up there at Campbell River ever gets going, I think you'd want to make pretty sure that you were said that they had to stay 3.7 kilometers out there. Otherwise, anything hanging into it is going to be pretty severe. This is an LNG truck exploding in China. It's got 20 tons of LNG aboard, because they ship it occasionally to places in China from where they import it. An LNG tanker has 60,000 tons of LNG aboard. This is 20.
5 people and sending visible shock waves across the road. People were filmed desperately trying to escape as smoke billowed from a tanker that had overturned on the major motorway in central China's Hunan province on Saturday. After the road is engulfed in thick smoke, a massive blast rocks the highway and surrounding valley. 5 people, including 3 firefighters, were killed in the explosion. 2 fire trucks and 5 other vehicles were destroyed. The tanker was carrying liquefied natural gas and had leaked around 20 tons before the blast. The tanker was still burning on Sunday afternoon. 7 vehicles, including 2 fire trucks, were destroyed in the blast. The cause of the accident is still under investigation.
By the way, Ford is currently shipping from its Tilbury plant LNG, 20-ton LNG tankers, just like that one in China, up through the streets of Delta, Vancouver, Kamloops, Williams Lake, up to Inuvik, 20 tons of LNG to supply the town with power for the winter. But nobody really questions them. House Sound would likely have exclusion zones around these. The Sandia report recommended that you have exclusion zones around tankers to keep shipping away, keep terrorists if they come around. And you may remember that the one who marched into the Parliament buildings had actually been employed in Squamish for the last 2 years, so before he did that terrible deed in Ottawa. Anyhow, the Society of International Gas Tanker and Terminal Operators, SIGTO, said, do not put LNG plants in narrow inland waters, they went on to say, that have significant populations around them, like West Van and Bowen, and that have significant recreational traffic. And if you've ever been in House Sound in the wintertime, or in the summertime particularly, and heard BC, as I do, BC ferries honk, 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 to get the sailors out of their way, you know there's a pretty busy waterway. And they further said, and that have any ferry traffic in them, which there are, as you know, at least 4 ferries in Howe Sound. wood fiber, and I'll give you the quotation here, is going to, if it's powered by gas, and they're making some moves to power it by some of it by electricity, would kick about 735,000 tons of carbon dioxide into the air every year, in-house sound. That's a pretty closed air shed. That's equivalent to about 137,000 extra vehicles doing whatever they normally do, in-house sound. And there would be hydrogen sulfide, nitrous oxide, which is smog. So face the prospect that this thing is built and it's powered by its own gas supply of having a fairly smoggy house sound when you pass through it. As you know, this is supernatural BC. We have spent a lot of money, and there's a $1.4 billion tourist economy that puts 2.5 million people up and down that road, that Sea to Sky Highway, every year. To threaten that for the returns that you would get off an LNG plant is not a good economic argument. If powered by electricity, about 80% of it would be down to about 147,000 tons of basically greenhouse gases. There'd be a flare. These two storage tankers, they wouldn't be on land, they'd be underwater. So if you put a hole in them, they're old abandoned tankers that they bought up, and they're proposing to use them there. They're going to bolt them together and then use that as storage rather than on land. It's very dangerous, especially by people who have never built or operated an LNG plant ever, and are not members of that international organization. This LNG plant is going to be powered, or is going to use seawater to cool it. And there's an awful lot of heat that you take out of the gas to make it liquid. And they're going to use seawater to basically dump the gas. This one is going to dump 17,000 tons of water that's 10 degrees hotter Celsius than they took it in, and issue that every hour into house sound 24/7, 365 by 25 years. Threatening to return house sound, and you know how the salmon and the dolphin and the whales have all been returning to house sound over the last 10 years, and I've rejoiced to see them. We passed some tonight coming over here. That this is probably going to destroy that life, because they go after the herring and the small fish. This is going to bake them, because they have to go in and out of the piping of the LNG plant, and they also get dosed with chlorine, hypochlorite, because they want to prevent fouling of the exit pipe back to ship the water back into the house sound. So baked, chlorinated, heated, dished out as a dead species out into the sound to decay and soak up all the oxygen in the water. If that's the future for Sarita Bay, then they do have to understand, if their living is from fishing, and they have made a historical practice out of living off fish, this is a 2 million tons per annum plant. Can you imagine a 30 million ton in Sarita Bay? I can't, and I wouldn't do that bargain for a minute. So LNG plant emissions are a small part of LNG life cycle emissions, as Damien has pointed out. The plant is a small, even if it burns its own gas, about 10% of its gas to manufacture electricity needed for liquefaction. The main one is that where its end consumer combustion is most of the 330 tons of greenhouse gases produced for every 100 tons of LNG. We have a commitment in Canada to reduce our, in BC, to reduce our greenhouse gas content by 2020 by 33%. If these plants are built, it'll go the other way and add 33%, roughly 20 million tons per annum to our thing, and this government is about to break its own law. Canada is another story, and equally dismal one, where we are nowhere near, we're about halfway to our target by 2020, again, of reducing our greenhouse gases. We're breaking international commitments and becoming a disgrace in the world. The good news, if there is that you remember the promises. Back when Premier Clark made the announcement that there was a generational opportunity, we were going to basically exercise the spread between what we pay for gas and what the Asians are willing to pay for it. We were going to make $100 billion and live happily ever after. Since that date, the price has tanked to under $10. Today, you can work out that's roughly the break even. You cannot, in North America, produce, ship, liquefy LNG and ship it to Asia for under $10. There's no way, it's just the economics. Currently, the way you can estimate, when you wake up in the morning and you hear what the price of oil is like today, the West Texas Intermediate, divide by 7, and you've got roughly what the spot price for LNG is in Asia. Currently, that today was about $46, $47. Divide by 7, and you got under 7, maybe $6. So the entire LNG industry proposal for BC is totally uneconomic. And short of hiring the workers and giving the gas away, this government cannot make, Sikorsky couldn't get this thing off the ground. You've seen the list of things that have pulled out. Apache pulled out under investor pressure. Petronas said, if you don't give me what I want, I'm picking up my ball and going home. We won't see me for 15 years. And I would have, as Premier, told him to not slam the door on the way out. And that was not a bargaining position that I would prefer for what is supposed to be a partnership. BC and China allow foreign workers in, so the promise that, remember, BCers would be first to the post for jobs ain't true. And the government set 3.5% income tax for LNG, half of what it was planned. That's actually several hundreds of billions of dollars giveaway in taxation, because basically to try and prop up the fact that the gas price was dropping in Asia. The gas price is dropping in Asia for a whole bunch of reasons, because Australians coming on stream with a big pile of plants, they've already got sunk investments there, and these are the same people, Exxon, Petronas, Shell, who have plants in Australia they just built, looking at how on earth can we make ends meet with them, that are considering building here. And they're not dumb, these people, and they're going to go, well, if there's a surplus in the world, why on earth would we build extra plants in BC? The government has since dropped that and said, if you set up a head office here, we'll drop it to 0.5%. And for those of who pay taxes here, anybody not like that deal? Would you like to be taxed after 5
years on profits?
On your profits only. After your capital costs are written off, on your net profits that you've managed to leave here at 0.5%. This is a graph from KPMG, my firm, ex-firm. The opportunity gap that was there in roughly 2014, 15, now, well, 14, I think, at this stage, was a very brief window of opportunity, and for the next 15 years, Mr. Petronas was right. The next 15 years, there's an oversupply in the world, we're not going to do it. So he basically has pulled out. The gas revenues for BC have dropped in 2014. This was 2000. They went up to about $2 billion around 2006, but has since dropped to about $197 million a year. In terms of the total BC budget, this is chump change. So this is what the gas industry contributes. There's jobs by sector. I pointed out where the oil and gas and mining industry relative to retail, healthcare, etc. Drop in the bucket. This is not a jobs-rich environment. They are largely automated, these plants. The jobs promise was very rash, is unfulfillable. The subsidies, won't go through the gory detail. These are stats from the finance ministry. I went through them, showing my true accountancy background. When you roll everything together, almost $7 billion over the last 8 or 10 years. Enough that you could afford a BC Hydro holiday. In other words, for a whole year, no hydro bills. And for a whole year, free ICBC insurance for that amount of money for everybody in BC. That's what's been spent on trying to get these dudes to flog a dead LNG horse. And just in case you think that the profits from these companies would go to you, this is a graph done by the Parkland Institute from the University of Alberta, which the red bit is the corporate share, the green bit is from land sales, and the blue bit is from royalty fees. This is the Alberta model, which BC has copied in its LNG framework, except Alberta charges 6% to the companies. We're charging variously 3.5% or 0.5%. So we're not about to get rich on this ever. There is going to be no $100 billion heritage fund in BC. There never was going to be, but at these prices, there's not even going to be an industry. But no matter, and the government keeps avoiding the advice that most people get at a very young age, saying if you're in a hole, time to stop digging. So basically, the long-term jobs, I don't believe it. The wood fiber plant is going to employ 50 people. There is a gondola there, which is marvelously successful so far, that has over 100 staff, twice as many as would be in this LNG plant, and has sold 10,000 season passes already. So you could build a hotel in Squamish and employ far more people than you would in this LNG business, and you wouldn't have all the smog and the water emissions and the problems. Debt-free BC, our debt is variously 69 billion. It's not going to be impacted at all. At $197 million a year, we could look forward to being debt-free about 409 years from now. So, this is just the EA process, and that's where they are at the moment. And tonight there's actually an environmental assessment demonstration or open house being held in Squamish for this, which I hope some of my colleagues are asking some fairly acute and embarrassing questions. Maybe we can stop there and I'll take questions.